Hey guys, Mr. TNA here, coming to you with the first video. I mentioned I was going to do a couple of days ago. This will be the first of several that I'll be doing, just talking about some of my ideas. Well, if you couldn't tell already from the title, this video is something to do with TNA, Mexican wrestling promotion AAA, and pay-per-views. So what it is a couple of months ago or a couple of weeks ago, I'm not sure, I can't really remember. I was reading something. Once again, I can't remember what exactly I was reading, but it was just talking about TNA's pay-per-views, and I saw so many people putting stuff like, they're all the same, they're in the impact zone. What's the point in paying $35 to watch a 3-hour event in the impact zone when there's no real crowd reaction that really ruins the pay-per-view, and stuff like that. So I started having to think, what would really be, what would make some of the pay-per-views different and make them worth the money that they are. And just by chance, while I was doing this, I flicked on an article talking about TNA and AAA and how good that their relationship was going so far, with TNA wrestlers going down to Mexico and putting in some good performances, doing some good matches, and being well liked by the Mexican crowds and the in AAA. So I thought to myself, well, I've watched a couple of AAA pay-per-views because I've seen some of the TNA wrestlers on there, and it's been really cool. It's a different environment, it's a different crowd, it's a bigger crowd actually. I hate to say it, TNA, but you don't draw the biggest of crowds. Anyway, that's not the point. So yeah, seeing the fact that TNA had a strong relationship with AAA, and looking into just some little details, I came up with the idea of TNA and AAA doing 4 interpromotional pay-per-views a year. What I mean by interpromotional is basically TNA and AAA coming together and both together producing a pay-per-view, or in my idea, 4 pay-per-views a year. So I'm just gonna go through the months that I would have them in and give the reasons why. So we'll start with the main TNA pay-per-views that you can't really replace with. So you got, in January you got Genesis, which I think is a big TNA pay-per-view. Regardless of AAA not having an event in January, I think that Genesis is a big pay-per-view for TNA, and I think they should keep it because it's been a very good pay-per-view in the past couple of years. February you've got Against All Odds, which wouldn't be a big loss, seeing the fact there's no real memorable moments or just any excitement that you can get around the Against All Odds pay-per-view. So that'd be the first month I've had an international pay-per-view, because AAA don't have a pay-per-view in February. March you've got Victory Road for TNA. I'd keep that because it's the leading pay-per-view to Lockdown, and I really do think that for most of the big pay-per-views you could do with a leading pay-per-view. But I will contradict myself in a minute, but I will explain why I'm contradicting myself, because there is a reason for it. So you've got Victory Road in March, and you've also got AAA doing an event called Rey de Reyes, which is translates to King of Kings. They have had that for a long time, so you can't claim that they stole it from a certain wrestling organisation and a certain wrestler who calls himself the King of Kings. So yeah, that's not a month I would do a interpromotional pay-per-view. You've got April, where there's no pay-per-view for AAA, but there is Lockdown, which has become the second biggest pay-per-view for TNA. So I wouldn't replace Lockdown or move it to another month, because it fits in perfectly, seeming the fact that Bound for Glory and Lockdown have a 6-month gap between each other. And if you've got your biggest pay-per-view and your second biggest pay-per-view, That's the best thing you can do. Have a 6-month gap between them. Yeah, and there's AAA don't have a pay-per-view in April, as I think I mentioned a minute ago. Then you got May. You've got Sacrifice in May for TNA, and you've not got a pay-per-view again for AAA. They only have 5 pay-per-views a year, so that's why most of the time they don't have a pay-per-view in a certain month. That's a place I would have an interpromotional pay-per-view. Now you're probably thinking, well, June's Slammiversary, and that's a big pay-per-view, and you just said you should have a pay-per-view leading into a big pay-per-view. Well, in my opinion, between Lockdown and Slammiversary, there's not really, I don't really pay attention to Sacrifice, because all I see is Sacrifice as a stepping stone for the feuds and the matches that are going to happen at Slammiversary. That's me personally. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, but I really do forget about Sacrifice, and it would be a good I think having an interpromotional pay-per-view with AAA, that's a perfect void to fill. That would be a month where, okay, I might actually care about the pay-per-view now, because it might be, if in a big arena, it might be on the road, there might be some big matches booked for it from both TNA and AAA. So that would, I think, an interpromotional pay-per-view in May would make me care again about TNA's May pay-per-view. Then you got June. You've got Slammiversary for TNA, which is the anniversary of the company, which, in my opinion, should be a big deal. Is a big deal. It's gone down a bit in whack though the past couple of years because of, I don't know, last 2 years when Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff have come in, they've decided that they're not going to go on the road with Slammiversary, which it might be for reasons financially. I really don't know. I don't know their exact reason, but regardless, it's kind of hurt the tradition of Slammiversary, in my opinion. And for AAA, you've got Triple Mania, which is their Bound for Glory. It's their biggest pay-per-view of the year. So I don't think that they're going to say, well, we'll not have Triple Mania this year. We'll just have an interpromotional pay-per-view instead. So yeah. So that's now a month that I would have an interpromotional pay-per-view. Go to July, you've got Destination X for TNA, which is becoming a big pay-per-view for them because of, the Fights in All X Division pay-per-view. And I'm not sure what the buy rates were, regardless of what people will say, whether it be, oh, it's only a couple thousand according to a certain someone, and then someone else says, oh, it's definitely in the 30s and 40,000s and stuff like that. But it is a big pay-per-view because it's All X Division, and if you're going to go on account from this year's Destination X 2011, it is a it delivers. It's a pay-per-view that delivers. So regardless, anyway, because of that, I wouldn't have an interpromotional pay-per-view in July. Also, this year, AAA had a pay-per-view called Verano de Escándalo, that's the one, which stands for Summer of Scandal. Usually, I've looked up, and they usually have the Summer of Scandal pay-per-view in September. But this year they had it in July to fit with the name, I think, so it's actually in the summer. I don't know if they'll go back to having it in September next year, but it doesn't make a difference, as you'll hear in a minute. August, you've got Hardcore Justice, which is kind of a false name, seeming the fact this past year's edition I don't think it had a hardcore match on it, or any stipulation. If it did, it must have had like one that I can remember. That was it. I don't think it was any hardcore whatsoever, because a lot of people were saying it's called Hardcore Justice, yet you don't have any hardcore matches. Why don't you just call it Hard Justice like you did before? There's no event for AAA in August, so that would be another month that I would have an interpromotional pay-per-view. And if you're paying attention, which I hope you are, you'll see that there's a pattern formed where February, May and August, between all of them there's a 3-month gap, which wasn't originally intended by me, but afterwards when you hear the fourth one, which if you do your math you'll guess what the fourth month to have an event in is, excuse me, you will notice that it's the patterns continued. So September, you've got No Surrender, which has become an important pay-per-view because No Surrender is now the host of the Bound for Glory Series finals, which is a great concept in my opinion. I hope it returns next year. So I wouldn't get rid of that because that real pay-per-view is built around, you know, the Bound for Glory Series finals. And also for AAA, you've got no pay-per-view, but as I mentioned before, they could change the Summer of Scandal pay-per-view that they do back to September. So even though if that was the case, it wouldn't make a difference because it would the system wouldn't be affected because there would be no co-promoted pay-per-view in that month. October, you've got Bound for Glory for TNA, how can you forget? Biggest pay-per-view of the year. And for AAA, you have Heroes Immortals, or Immortals, I'm not sure, which basically is a tribute pay-per-view to their founder and former owner that died 5 years ago, 6 years ago maybe, Antonio Pena. Which is a big pay-per-view anyway, so regardless, because seeing the fact AAA has an event in that month, you wouldn't have a co-promoted pay-per-view in there anyway, and seeming Bound for Glory is the biggest pay-per-view of the year, you wouldn't have it anyway. November, you've got Turning Point for TNA, you've got nothing for AAA. As I mentioned before, between all of them there's a 3-month gap. If you've worked it out, yes, this is the month where you would have the final co-promoted pay-per-view of a calendar year. So yeah, I would have one in November, and then just to round it off in December, you've got Final Resolution, which is, to me, it's a fairly big pay-per-view for TNA because it's the last pay-per-view of the year. There's usually some good matches, and I mean, if you look back on just think about this. Say Final Resolution AJ Styles, his match in the last couple of years. Couple of weeks ago, it was against Bobby Roode in an Iron Man match for the world title. Last year, it was against Doug Williams in what I think was nearly voted match of the night for the TV title. And the year before, it was against Daniels in the main event for the world title. You know, they're 3 big matches just concerning one guy. And if you look back at the history of Final Resolution, there's some fantastic matches. So feel free to check them out. Go ahead, because it's a very good pay-per-view. And for AAA, there is Guerra de Titans, which means War of the Titans. That's their last pay-per-view of the year, which is also, for them, a big pay-per-view. So, that is the calendar year combined for TNA and AAA, and they are the months that I would have the co-promoted pay-per-views. February, May, August, and November. Now, let's just talk about some of the small things that might be a problem but wouldn't be a problem. Now, the United States has 4 different time zones, and one of the time zones is exactly the same as Mexico's time zone. So, regardless of what time the show would start and what time it would air on pay-per-view, it could air live, it wouldn't make a difference. How the pay-per-views air right now, it wouldn't make a difference whatsoever. So it would be fine airing a pay-per-view live from Mexico or the United States across both countries, and then some other countries that have live pay-per-view deals with TNA and AAA. So how would you work it? What would I do if I was in this position? What I would do is I would split the card in half. I would give TNA, to be fair, give TNA 4 matches, give AAA 4 matches. You know, because the thing is, you could not, if you're gonna have, I would only assume that AAA would book a world title match and TNA would book a world title match, and then both companies would probably book a semi-main event, which would be a big feud happening. So you couldn't have any more than 8 matches, because if you wanted those 4 matches to go a good length of time, or a fair length of time, then you'd have to do 8 matches, and also it's an even number, so both companies get a fair amount of matches. With that being said, you could also do interpromotional matches between a TNA star and a AAA star, or a TNA tag team and a AAA tag team, or how many number of talent you want going against each other from each company. You could have interpromotional matches. There's nothing stopping you there, which could be a really good thing. Where would they be? Well, I would have two of the pay-per-views be held from a town or a city in Mexico, and then I would have the other 2 from the United States. I'd do it on a revolving rota. So, like in February, say you'd have one event in Mexico. Then, when it comes to May for the pay-per-view, you have it in the United States. Then in August you go to Mexico, and then November United States, and then the following year you'd switch it round. So February would be United States, May would be Mexico, and so on. You don't really have to do that though. I mean, you could, if you wanted to, go to a different country that's got a similar or exact same time zone. I'm not sure if Argentina or Chile or something. It would just have to depend on how AAA would be breaking into those countries and how TNA would be. But you don't have to limit yourself just to United States or Mexico. They could do a show in Canada. I'm not sure if there's a deep lucha libre market in Canada, but you could try it, whatever. So this would also help TNA a little bit, because, say for example, there are 2 US shows. They chose a lucha libre market in the United States. Say for example, one of them was in California and the other was in Texas, and because of using the AAA name and promoting it, they'd probably get a bigger crowd than they've ever had before, for the pure reason that lucha libre stars, AAA stars are appearing, and the Hispanic community in a certain area in Texas or a certain area in California would show up because they're diehard faithful fans. Which then could help TNA loads, because it could boost television ratings, it could boost house show attendances for those areas, because the fans that were going to the event as Lucha Libre fans came out as AAA fans and TNA fans, so it's got its benefits and rewards, and that's just one of those. Another good thing for it would be the amount of money both companies could save. I know AAA only do 5 pay-per-views, so they wouldn't spend for any more than 5 pay-per-views anyway. But for TNA, they would, for those 4 pay-per-views, their costs would be slashed in half. If they made an agreement to AAA where they'd say, except for wrestlers' pay, which to keep it fair, I mean, if AAA booked their matches in, it's like most of their mid-card, and then they have the world champion and somebody else, and TNA booked their 4 matches being like 4 one-on-one matches with 8 of the biggest and highest paid talent in the company, it's not really going to be fair on AAA if they have to split the bill in half, because they're going to be paying basically paying for 4 of TNA's guys, 4 of TNA's main eventers that have a bigger budget than their main eventers. So except for wrestlers' wages, if you said all the production costs, all the expenses and everything will split 50-50, and then we'll split the profits 50-50, you're going to be saving half your money that you would spend on a pay-per-view you did yourself. So then you could take some of the money that you've saved and put it into promoting it. You could buy posters, you could buy billboards, advertising on television and radio. You could do all sorts, and it would benefit, because one of the things TNA gets criticised a lot for is their advertising. I mean, if TNA said, let's just say, for example, TNA spends, I'm not saying I know the numbers, I don't think I'm anywhere near, but just for example, let's say TNA spends $500,000 on a pay-per-view, on every pay-per-view. Minimum they spend, let's say for a pay-per-view in the Impact Zone, they pay $500,000 in expenses, for talent, for whatever. If they're doing a co-promoted show with AAA, they're only spending $250,000. They can take the other $250,000 that they're saving to not only invest in promoting that pay-per-view, but then promoting the company themselves. They can take that back and say, well, how's about we invest $75,000 in advertising for the television programming, $75,000 in advertising house shows, and the rest we took away, and then we can use to promote some of our bigger pay-per-views even more than we already do. You know, so it's a beneficial thing to TNA to do, because they'd be saving some amount of money that they could then reinvest into other areas as well as the their pay-per-view budget. So also the opportunity, you could also have a future opportunity to you could do co-promoted television tapings. I mean, what I mean by that is, usually when TNA go on the road, they do 2 tapings of Impact Wrestling. They do 2 editions of Impact Wrestling. They tape basically 4 hours of television in a night. What they could do in the future this is just a possible thing that they could try to do if the co-promoted pay-per-views are successful, is, say for example, they bring over a bunch of AAA guys to the United States. They go to a certain area where there's a deep market for TNA and for AAA, and then they tape an episode of Impact Wrestling, and then they follow that up by taping an episode of AAA's main show, Sin Limit, which is No Limit in English, by the way. Pardon me. So that's another good opportunity right there for them. That's a future thing that they could do. Another thing that TNA could benefit. So what they can benefit out of it so far? They could save money. They could increase buy rates because of, you know, people thinking, well, they're going to be in Mexico, and AAA sells out a lot of buildings, so this should be a pretty packed house. Why don't we buy it and see how it is? There's some good matches. Let's have a watch. And it could increase, but I'm not saying it will, but it could increase buy rates quite a bit for those pay-per-views anyway. Another thing they could gain out is, usually TNA's booking style is to book at least a storyline for a month and then culminate at the pay-per-view where something happens to either end the storyline or continue the storyline to the next month. If you do these 4 co-promoted pay-per-views, every one of these co-promoted pay-per-view months, 4 of the usual feuds that go on your pay-per-views when you promote them on your own wouldn't be able to culminate on pay-per-view. So say for example, you look at a card, TNA would be able to book a world title match, a semi-main event, a tag team title match, and a knockouts title match. And then you're missing out on your knockouts tag team titles, your X Division title, your television title, and then a couple of mid-card feuds. So this would give TNA an opportunity to go to Spike TV and say, well listen, we're going to be doing 4 pay-per-views with AAA. We're not going to be able to culminate other feuds on pay-per-view, so we have the opportunity here, if you give it us possibly 2 hours on a Saturday night in that month, to have these feuds that would go on pay-per-view on free TV as an Impact Wrestling special. So for example, between Genesis and Against All Odds, imagine Against All Odds is definitely one of these co-promoted pay-per-views. Between Genesis and the co-promoted pay-per-view, usually there's 5 weeks, because TNA come over to the UK and do the tour. So they have 5 weeks, so talent have can do the tour, then have a little bit of a break, and then do television. So what you could do is you could have 3 editions of Impact after Genesis. Then on the Saturday after the 3rd Impact, so say like you've got Thursday after the pay-per-view, the week after that, the week after that, then 2 days later on the Saturday, you could have an Impact Wrestling Saturday Night Special where you would have these feuds. You'd have 3 weeks or maybe 4 weeks if the feud was happening before Genesis, to build up these matches, then to have them culminate on this Impact Wrestling Special. And then afterwards you've got 2 episodes of Impact Wrestling where you can hype the 4 matches that are going to be on the pay-per-view, you know, for the 2 weeks before. And then possibly, if not every month has 5 weeks between them, not every pay-per-view has 5 weeks between them, most of them have 4. So for the other 3, you could have between the 4 pay-per-view events, you could do 4 weeks of television building up all of the feuds, and then on the Saturday night, the night before the pay-per-view on the Sunday, on the Saturday night, you could have the Saturday Night Special, where not only would you culminate so many feuds that won't be on the pay-per-view, you could also have 1, maybe 2 matches hyping up the other matches that are going to be on the pay-per-view for the next night, which in some cases might be substantial to the buy rates because it'll be fresh in people's minds. You know, if you're watching they hype up a pay-per-view and an episode of Impact Wrestling a night before a pay-per-view, and then through the entire night they have these feuds culminate, and they keep mentioning tomorrow night on pay-per-view, world title match, this guy takes on this guy, and a big feud that's been building up for months and stuff, and they hype that, it could affect buy rates in a positive way, and it could increase them. So there's all these little things that you could get out of doing co-promoted pay-per-views, and it would guarantee really a relationship with AAA for a few years to come. If you signed an agreement between yourself, TNA, AAA, and the pay-per-view provider, said we'll do 4 years worth. We'll do 4 years for the next 4 years. We'll provide 4 co-promoted pay-per-views a month, in a year, in a calendar year. Then you're going to guarantee that you've got AAA as your in a working relationship. You've got a guaranteed contract that says for the next 4 years we're going to be able to rely on these guys just in case we need them for anything, or we want to do another show with them together. So that's my idea on how to spice up the pay-per-view scene. Feel free to like the video if you like it. Leave comments in the comment section below. Subscribe to the YouTube channel because there's more of these videos to come with some other good ideas. I'm not certain on what video is going to be next, what topic the video is going to be on next. Thank you very much for listening. Follow me on Twitter if you want to keep up to date with me. It's at Mr. TNA. So hope you enjoyed the video and hope you listen to my next video. Thank you very much and have a good day.